Howdy friends, this is Pelican Man bringing you another Death of Taxes video. This week, we're going back to Leonin Arbiter. I'm sure, like myself, a lot of you were excited when we saw White Orchid Phantom get previewed, thinking of the things it could do with Leonin Arbiter, similar to what Ghost Quarter and Volatile Vault and Field of Ruin were already doing in our deck. But then I think we got a little distracted with the Recruiter of the Guard, thinking that tutoring with the Recruiter of the Guard and blinking with Phelia was good enough, which it definitely looked like it would be, and I think in previous mod it might have been. But in current mod, the format's really fast, so I think in order to make taxes still viable, leaning back into Leonin Arbiter might still be important. I think what's nice though is that our opponents seem to run a lot of low basic counts in their decks, so White Orchid Phantom can punish our opponents by itself or can still ramp ourselves with Flagstones, but having the kind of combo in our deck of Leonin Arbiter with these things to actually deny our opponents mana from very early on, I think could be a very powerful thing to lean into. So looking at the rest of the deck list, we are running Stoneforge Mystic. Our plan is, if we have Stoneforge Mystic and Leonin Arbiter, there are two ways we go. Either we play the Stoneforge first, open it up to removal, and just try and get it out and get that tutor out of the way. Or if Leonin Arbiter is very important because we have a Leonin Arbiter kind of hand, we run that out first. That's just how it works. But Leonin Arbiter is more like a 3-drop, because we often want to pair it with a Ghost Quarter in the same turn, or maybe we want to wait for a Vial to tick up to 2 to play Arbiter and Phantom in the same turn, that kind of thing. So we often will get a window to put Stoneforge Mystic out into play first, and we also are so 2-drop heavy and have a lot of valuable 2-drops that we want to stick around, that if we play Stoneforge to get Kaldra and they don't answer it, cool, we get Kaldra. If they do, they've spent that removal, that counterspell, that interaction on the Stoneforge, and they might not have it for our follow-up land destruction plan. So I think that's worthwhile enough. We're still doing Solitude Ephemerate things because that is still a very powerful thing to do in some of our worst matchups, like Nardo and Boros Energy. Our Stoneforge package, obviously Kaldra. We've got Maul because it's a pretty fast clock, but also isn't reliant on Stoneforge staying in play. And then Lion Sash is just a really good interactive piece. Flage out of Boros Energy is one of the scary things, so we want something to do about that. Still on 4 Giver, 4 Aether Vial. I actually have a 2-2 split of Flickerwisp and Aven Interrupter. Flickerwisp is this nice little middle ground where it works really well with Phelia by itself, works well with White Orchid Phantom to keep up the mana denial plan, and then it works with our 4 Witch Enchanter in the mana base to blow up artifacts or enchantments from turn 3. But because of Nardo and Jeskai Energy being so big, I do actually want Aven Interrupters because they're really good against Court of Calling and Wrath of the Skies. If our opponent Wrath of the Skies after a Tune the Narrative or a Galvanic Discharge with leftover energy, they can still punish us, but Aven Interrupter means when they recast it from plot, they can't pay into X, so they can't generate energy off the Wrath of the Skies, and that might be good enough. But otherwise, it does just delay their Wrath of the Skies by a turn, so that is something. As for the mana base, we do still have 4 Flagstones. They work so nice with Ghost Quarter and Phantom that I do really like them. They are unfortunately a non-bow with Leonin Arbiter, where if you play 2 of them, they will legend rule and you'll need to pay 2 to search with Arbiter. My plan for that is just to, if I have 2 of them, play them both out as soon as possible. If I want to Ghost Quarter or Phantom one early, I try and do it as early as possible. Just try and play the list being aware that Leonin Arbiter will make multiple copies of Flagstones bad, so trying to circumvent that as early as possible. We do have the Elegant Parlor to be gotten off Flagstones to give us a free Surveil, 6 basic planes, an Eiganjo Castle, which protects Phelia, and 2 Eiganjo City of the Empire. Now, my plan for this list was to test Razorgrass Ambush in place of the second Eiganjo. There's a lot of pros and cons to both. Basically, Razorgrass Ambush is a white card that pitches to Solitude. Eiganjo isn't counterable, but it costs 3. This costs 2. Eiganjo costs 2 with a Phelia. Eiganjo deals 4. Razorgrass deals 3. But ultimately, I've chosen to go with this mostly because this effect isn't super relevant, so I think we're actually going to get punished more often by having to play both copies of this legendary land than the 4 damage would be relevant, or that the uncounterable would be relevant in the matchups where we're trying to do this. So that was my plan, but I forgot to take the second Eiganjo out when I submitted and started the league, so I will actually be playing a 61 card special with a 23rd land for this league, so keep that in mind. Going to the sideboard, we do just have a bunch of 2-ofs, so 2 Disruptor Flute. This is mostly for the One Ring, but also good against combo matchups and any activated abilities we might be worried about. 2 Drannith Magistrate and 2 High Noon. These are both cards for Storm, Living End, that kind of thing. The split is mostly just for fun, just in case there's matchups where we want one or the other. I think I did find some matchups where we didn't want 4 copies of this effect and one was better than the other. Mostly I'm trying to test High Noon here. I think it's interesting that because we do get Elegant Parlor out a decent amount, we can stall our combo opponent with High Noon and then eventually just sacrifice it to finish the game off if our opponent gets under 5 life. 2 Hallowed Moonlight, mostly for unfair combo decks trying to cheat creatures into play. In a pinch, we can just bring it in to pair with Phelia, that we can cast Hallowed Moonlight, attack with Phelia, blink our opponent's creature out, and prevent it from coming back. But mostly the matchups where we want to do this are the matchups where they're going to try and cheat those creatures out, and then if we draw this late, we can use Phelia for that trick. 2 Sanctifier en-Vec. This is mostly for Flage, but any black or red deck that's mid-range enough will have removal, and Sanctifier just becomes a bear that can't be killed, which is really good. 2 Flare. This is mostly respect of Wrath of the Skies out of Jeskai, but also any other sweepers we might come across, or even just removal heavy decks or hand heavy decks we can consider it against, though I'm mostly using this just for countering sweepers. And then 3 copies of Wrath of the Sky. This one is almost purely for Boros energy. That matchup feels pretty bad, I think. So Wrath of the Skies should get to mop up the thing that's hardest for us, which is Ocelot Pride plus Guide of Souls. So I am running 3 Wrath of the Skies. Everything else is a 2 of. I did get to run 1 as a 3 of for the 15th sideboard slot, and I have chosen to respect the Boros matchup a lot by having the extra copy of Wrath of the Skies. So with that said, that's the deck list, the 61 card special. Let's get into match number 1 and see how we go. Okay, match number 1. I believe this was against Eldrazi aggro. I chose to play first this game, obviously, and our opponent has Gemstone Caverns to steal the play back, but we do get to lead turn 1 Give of Runes with the possibility of having failure from turn 2, and our opponent has a Talisman to ramp a little. So our opponent does nothing on their turn, so I just flash in failure. I get to surveil a Aether Vial to the bin with Elegant Parlor, flash in the Phantom, blow up their land, and attack with failure and get another Phantom trigger. So I will blink my White Orchid Phantom, but our opponent has a Dress Down, which is fine. I was probably going to blow up my Elegant Parlor just to get another Plains out of my deck, but I also kind of don't care that I don't get the ability. What's more concerning is that our opponent is mostly just using this Dress Down to evoke in this Null Drifter and not have to sacrifice it while still getting to draw 2 cards, because that is a cast trigger and not an enter the battlefield ability. So I choose to flash in Solitude, because while I won't get to exile the Null Drifter, I don't have to sacrifice it to evoke. So the plan here being, I'll play Flickerwisp, flicker away the Null Drifter, and then I get to attack with my whole board. Phelia blinks the Flickerwisp, Flickerwisp comes back, exiles their Eldrazi Temple, and our opponent actually just scoops it up here. They've seen enough already, apparently, so let's get on to sideboarding for this matchup. Okay, so sideboarding against the Eldrazi Dress Down deck, I decided that I want to bring in Hallowed Moonlight, which would help me remove some of their threats potentially. They look like they might be Eldrazi aggro. I wasn't quite sure, so I thought if they are aggro, the combination of Phelia plus Moonlight might be something I want. And then Disruptor Flute, because I assume they might be on the One Ring, so that felt like a nice hedge. Plus, I could also just name big Eldrazi and stuff if really need be. I don't think I need 4 Give of Runes in the matchup. They're not really going to be removal heavy, so it's just to win at combat, and I'm trying to bring in Hallowed Moonlight to do that. Lion Sash is very medium because they don't care about their graveyard, and despite Flickerwisp looking okay in that last game, I figured there was no actual value I was getting off the ETB besides just looping Phantom, so I've decided to trim them and see how it works, so let's get into game number 2. Alright, so game number 2 on the draw, I decided to keep this 2-lander, and our opponent reveals Devour of Destiny in their opening hand. The cards in exile, the One Ring, Fabled Mirrorbreaker, double Pyroclasm, and they lead with Eldrazi Temple. Now, I think I was meant to lead with Witch Enchanter here as the land, because my plan is always to not want to play it untapped on turn 2, but I wanted to leave up Solitude Ephemerate, so I did decide to lead on the untapped land to not telegraph that. So here is where I'm playing out the Stoneforge Mystic, getting the Kaldra to maybe bait interaction to then start resolving Arbiter stuff, but I do also have the backup Stoneforge if they do have anything, and they just have a Kozilek's Command for 1 just to scry 1 and make an Eldrazi spawn token. And they follow up with Ugin's Labyrinth, putting away Devour of Destiny, ramping them up all the way up to 4 mana on turn 3, which they have a Kozilek's Command to get rid of my Stoneforge and make a bunch more Eldrazi spawns, so that's fun. And they attack just for the rubbins. Okay, I draw Aether Vial, so I choose to play Aether Vial here into pitch Solitude and Ephemerate to take down 2 Eldrazi spawns in the hopes that my opponent has 7 drops as follow-up that are non-Eldrazi. I don't know. Like, I'm pretty much out of this game because my opponent had such a fast start, so I'm just trying to do what I can to see if it's good enough. They have a Thought-Knot Seer, which gets to take the Stoneforge, making this Kaldra super dead in my hand, and they have Dismember for the Solitude. So here they're attacking with the Thought-Knot Seer. I do have Aven Interrupter up in case they cast something. I don't know, like normally I'd want to protect from all his dust, but I don't really have anything to protect right now. And they just have a Null Drifter, which is still super annoying for me. So here I draw Ephemerate, and the game's basically over here. I thought I'd hold up Leonin Arbiter and flashing an Aven Interrupter, but the Annihilator 1 on the Null Drifter is actually just probably the best thing going on here. So this game's over. Let's go on to game number 3. Okay, game number 3 against Blue-Red Eldrazi. We get to be on the play this time. And we see an okay hand, Double Giver, Phantom, Ephemerate, 3 lands. I'm going to keep it because Phantom should be good enough here. Turn 2 Phantom on the play with Giver Rune to protect it, I assume would be good enough. Now, our opponent plays out a Mountain, so I'm actually just going to hold the Phantom, play another Giver, and just hope that they play into the Phantom. Here I get to Legend Rule my Flagstones, get an Elegant Parlor to Surveil, keep Aven Interrupter on the top, and just jam the Phantom, blowing up a land. So here I get to hold up Ephemerate, and then next turn play Phelia, turn after start blinking the Phantom, and really get this mana denial going. I assume my opponent can't have more than 2 basics. They might have a third, like a Wastes. This Ghost Quarter is also looking pretty good. So we Ephemerate the Phantom, blow up the Temple. They do in fact have a second basic island. I choose not to rebound Ephemerate because there's no good targets, and I just want to get in with the Phantom here. Here I'm willing to take the risk that they don't have a second basic mountain and think I can just deny them of red, so that's something to be doing, and I get to be holding up Aven Interrupter or Phelia, which my opponent just plays the Labyrinth with nothing to do with it, so this Phelia is going to get to eat that, and it looks like our mana denial should be getting there this game. They have a Dress Down. I'm not sure what their plan is with the Dress Down, but I'm just going to Aven Interrupter it just so that I can use the Phantom to block their Labyrinth. That was probably what they're doing, just trying to prevent me from being able to do that. And they try and dismember a Phelia. I respond by activating one of my 2 givers, and my opponent, seeing that I understand how my cards work, decides to concede the game. So that is 2-1 record against Blue-Red Eldrazi. So we are 1-0 in the league. Let's get on to match number 2. Here we are for match number 2 against Blue-Red Wizards. Our opponent starts on the play, leads Basic Island into Preordain. I've kept my 7, which is a 2-lander with one of them being Ghost Quarter, with Arbiter, Phantom, and Phelia, with Flickerwisp and Solitude backing them up, which those cards could be okay depending on how the rest of the game goes, but our opponent dashes in a Ragavan early, so that is setting the pace for what's going on. So I will pitch the Flickerwisp to the Solitude. Our opponent pitch casts the Subtlety, so they are forcing their Ragavan to get through, but we've just traded a bunch of resources, and we're going to try and deny them resources for the rest of the game, so let's see how that goes. I decided to lead with Phantom because ramping myself when I've got these other 2 2-drops in hand seems pretty good. I can bait with Arbiter next turn and then like flash in Failure and then hope to top deck out of it from there. Plus the Phantom is really good at blocking Ragavan because it has First Strike, which means instead of playing Ragavan, our opponent's going to Expressive Iteration, get a Surveil in and just Surveil and pass it back to us. Well, they do in fact have the Lightning Bolt for our Phantom. I'm just going to play at Arbiter and hold up Ghost Quarter here. This is a position where it forces them to kind of do nothing, because if they do anything, they might make themselves vulnerable to getting Ghost Quartered if they tap under our Arbiter attacks. So that lets us blink in Failure. They do kill the Arbiter, but I find Stoneforge. I get to attack with Failure, blink the Stoneforge, and get all of my equipments into my hand. But our opponent has the Snapcaster for the Bolt, so Stoneforge does go down here. Now there's multiple things I could have done with this turn. I could have let Phelia and Snapcast trade played the Lion Sash because it looked Merc tidy, so Sash might have been good. I end up choosing to Solitude away the Snapcaster, but our opponent's back to just dashing Ragavan and hoping that's good enough. Which is funny because our deck's full of cards I don't want to cast. They just saw Leonin Arbiter, which would be very silly of them to cast. Here I'm just getting with Phelia and seeing if my opponent wants to do anything about it. I get to get rid of their treasure token, which they decide not to pop in response, so that tells me they have nothing to cast, so I'm just going to hardcast Witch Enchanter to kind of build up my clock here a little. And our opponent chooses not to dash Ragavan, which obviously they wouldn't because of the Witch Enchanter, but they didn't even cast it, so that to me suggests they might have something, but all I'm really worried about is Subtlety. So I choose to attack to blink the Giver to grow the Failure. They do have the Subtlety, but I have Eiganjo Castle to protect the Failure, which is something I missed a few turns ago with the Snapcaster. I could have let my opponent block and then protected Phelia with the Eiganjo Castle and kept my Solitude and Lion Sash in hand. Here our opponent has Flame of Venor, but no wizards, so they just kill Phelia, and they start getting in with a subtlety. I draw Phantom, which makes this Ragavan look silly again. I get to blow up one of their lands. And now I think I'm in a good spot. The subtlety is looking annoying, but we're playing here. Now my opponent attacks with subtlety, which I could just block with Phantom and give it Pro Blue from Give Up, but with my opponent selling 3 cards in hand, I don't really want to give up on Give Up protection right now. Flickerwisp was a pretty good draw, I think. Now my opponent has subtlety, which they will block something and force me to use my Give Up, but then they're going to trade their Ragavan for Witch Enchanter, which is fine. My Witch Enchanter was already... The only reason I played it was to trade with the Ragavan. And here I get to play out Flickerwisp, and I get to flicker the Phantom and test my opponent's basics some more. So I'm going to get rid of their Steam Vents. And they get Basic Island, so I think that puts them out of red source. So I Ghost Quarter their Basic Mountain, and they do not have a Basic Mountain to replace it. So that tells me I was correct. And now my opponent just has no removal anymore. So they're going to try and finish me off. I'm happy to trade my Flickerwisp for a subtlety, and they find Prismatic Vista as their land of the turn, which is hilarious in this board state. So now that my opponent's out of red mana, I'm not going to attack the Phantom because Phantom is just going to block subtlety and Gives going to protect it, because I don't think my opponent's going to be able to punish me because they don't have red mana to cast removal spells. And having drawn Ephemerate, I'm really just waiting for my opponent to play a non-basic that I can punish. Drawing White Orchid Phantom, I will get rid of their Prismatic Vista to just kind of get rid of it just in case, because why not? And they did actually sacrifice it in response and not pay the Arbiter tax, which was kind of weird. Here they have a Surveil land, which is awesome for me because it's a tap land, so I get to not let them untap with this red mana. And now with the second Arbiter, we're getting to the point where I actually do want to start trying to finish my opponent off, so giving Leonin Arbiter Pro Blue so I can attack past the subtlety gives me the opportunity to kill them in 1 to 2 turns, but it looks like my opponent just can't do anything without their red mana, so they do scoop up the first game. So let's go on to sideboarding for the blue-red Wizards matchup. Okay, so against the Wizard deck, I definitely want to bring in Sanctifier. They just can't really answer it except with a subtlety flashing in and blocking it. So very good card in the matchup. And I want to bring in Flare of Fortitude mostly because it enters Flame of Venor. Quite often Aether Vial is going to be very important for me in the matchup, and they're going to try and Flame of Venor to blow up Aether Vial and a creature. So Flare protecting from those 2 modes at once is pretty important, I think. So I am going to bring in Flare. I've decided to trim Flickerwisp because they don't really do heaps in the matchup. They're kind of just worse on one of our other things. And I'm also cutting Phelia and Ephemerate. Phelia is going to get blocked a lot. It's going to be irrelevant in combat a lot. And I don't think I really I'm not boarding into heavy blink effects. So I think I can just trim around the edges on my blink effects and run it like this. So let's get into game number 2 against Blue-Red Wizards. Okay, on the draw against Wizards, and double Aether Vial's fine, honestly. I'm just going to jam Aether Vials and just get my stuff in uncounted and then hope to dodge removal. And my opponent's over there not doing much of anything, which they're also somewhat of a out of the gates deck, but they had Ragavans, and if they are playing Wizards like Tamiyo and stuff, they probably don't want to be sitting around waiting and doing nothing. So I'm kind of happy to just sit here and grow my Aether Vials while my opponent's sitting around doing nothing. And then fetching basic off Vista is pretty good for me as well. So they bought it in Brotherhood's Den and blew up 2 vials, which really sucks for me. That is probably one of the bigger punishes that we could see. But I just drew another vial, so we are just going to play Vial and play Phantom, just to kind of get something going on the board. This is a very hard thing for them to deal with. And also this takes them off double red, because I know from game 1 they only have a single basic mountain in their deck, and they've got 4 islands. So if they don't get a non-basic here, this Ghost Quarter is looking very good. Fortunately, they do have Lightning Bolt for the Phantom. But here I'm just going to play out a Witch Enchanter, just kind of... My opponent's got 2 mana up, so I don't really want to run Stoneforge into removal when I'm about to Vial it in the following turn. So Witch Enchanter is just here as bait to see what my opponent does, which is a fantastic thing for a land to be able to do, I'm on 23 lands, unfortunately only meant to be on 22. But the fact that 4 of them are these Witch Enchanters that I can just play before in this matchup's kind of fine. And their Flame of Venor killing Vial is annoying, but we've traded a lot of resources for them to just answer Vial, so here's where I'm at the point where I'm kind of happy to just bait with Stoneforge, get a counterspell out of their hand, play Arbiter, and now Ghost Quarter gets to take out their Thundering Falls. And even if they can save mana for this Arbiter tax, this other Ghost Quarter can just take out their basic mountain and leave them with no red mana. So, and again, we know they've only got 1 basic island left in their deck. So even without Arbiter, we are going to start to mana deny them a lot. But Arbiter just means that they kind of need to hold up 2 mana at all times. So this looks like another potential position for subtlety. So I'm just going to attack with Witch Enchanter just to see if they have subtlety or not. Because again, if they play out subtlety, I drew a Ghost Quarter, so I get to Ghost Quarter 2 of their lands away. Now, I did decide to take out their red source. My opponent floated a red and then didn't pay the 2, so they don't get their 4th island to replace it. Which maybe they have it in hand, but they're not playing it out. So drawing Lion Sash here is good for us. Now that they're out of the matter to cast subtlety, I will just get in with the Arbiter and start clocking my opponent. And just for something to do, I might as well play up the Lion Sash, see if my opponent has counter magic, bait it out of their hand. Because if they don't, this Lion Sash is going to start growing. I'm going to probably grow it that turn. Next turn, put it on the Arbiter so that post-sweeper, the Sash falls off and gets to still keep dealing with my opponent. And now, having drawn White Orchid Phantom here, I am just happy to have this 2-turn clock with Witch Enchanter and Leonin Arbiter. As tempting as the Phantom could be, if my opponent ever taps out for something and they drew a non-basic or something, this Ghost Quarter and Phantom are going to take them out of the game completely. So this forces them to have action here, which comes in the form of Snapcaster Preordain, which honestly is kind of fine. Like, I still value Arbiter a lot here. I get to Ghost Quarter them down to just 2 islands and bait out any interaction with Stoneforge, even though I've got Arbiter in play, but my opponent does choose to pitchcast the subtlety to get rid of the Stoneforge, because maybe they don't realize how bad Leonin Arbiter is that it actually stops me from searching as well. Or maybe they're worried I have a Kaldra in hand, I don't know. But I'm more than happy to just not offer the trade with the Arbiter and just offer the trade with the Witch Enchanter. My opponent could have potentially opted to take the 2 damage there and trade next turn, but they do choose to trade there. And they're just passing back. So again, this Arbiter is a 2-turn clock. I have Eiganjo in case they have a Snapcaster to try and flash in to trade with the Arbiter. So I think I'm in a pretty good position here. There's really not a lot my opponent can do without, like, and now they can't even have Steam Vents to get them out of this, or even a fetch land. They're very out of their red source. So here I am just going to play Phantom to have 2 lethal threats. My opponent does have the counterspell, but they have no follow-up, and this Arbiter is just going to kill them. So that is 2-0 against Blue-Red Wizards, and we are 2-0 in the league. So let's get on to match number 3. Okay, match number 3, we're going to be against Jeskai Energy. Not Jeskai Control, but the Boros Energy deck with Mockingbird. Here we see a 4-lander with Stoneforge Failure Ephemerate, which is fine. I actually thought about this for a good long while, and basically decided that if we top deck a land during the next 3 turns at all, we're in a lot of trouble, and we are actually, unfortunately, up a land. So I did decide to send this one back and see what my 6 would be. And my 6 was essentially a 6-lander, so we do choose to go to 5, and our opponent decided to keep on 6, and here's our 5. So overall, not bad. I do get to bottom 2 lands. So second Flagstones is easy, and I choose to bottom the Eiganjo in favor of the Razorgrass in case I draw into Solitude or something. But also, Eiganjo costs 3, so if it's our 3rd land, I'd rather the 2-drop spell be our 3rd land, so we can either play it as land or cast it as a spell. And both are kind of fine if we start flooding, I think. Our opponent has Interrupter into Mockingbird, which Mockingbird doesn't get to copy the Interrupter, so it's just a 1/1 flyer. Our hand's looking really good. We play the Stoneforge, getting Kaldra to bait, knowing that we can Violin Arbor and double Ghost Quarter next turn, and our opponent just vomits out their entire hand. Interrupter hitting a Johnny, casting Static Prison. I do decide to go for the Arbiter plan here. The plan being that following up on that, they'll never cast another spell. I just have to beat this board that currently exists. And now they attack, and I realize I can't block. They have 2 first strikers on the ground, and the 2-1 that flips their Ajani to a Planeswalker, which, because they have red permanents, will just ruin us, and Mockingbird has flying. So my plan now is, just to Razorgrass Ambush an Interrupter on the following turn, and hope to draw something that helps me stem the bleeding. So we ambush a Raptor, take 5, go to 5, and my opponent has a Guide of Souls to follow up, which isn't doing anything, but the fact that they have a 1-drop play is kind of really annoying. So my Vial goes for 3, and I can Vial and Flickerwisp deal with Cat Token. I could Flickerwisp Static Prison, get my Stoneforge back, but then even if I get Kaldra into play, the Prison takes the Kaldra. And they just have a Mockingbird to copy Guide of Souls, and now I am just losing to this board. There's next to nothing I can do. I do choose to Flickerwisp away the Cat Warrior and chump block the Interrupter with the Leonin Arbiter. If I had Violed in the Flickerwisp 4 blocks, I could have traded with the Mockingbird as well, but I don't think I'm beating this board by trading away my Flickerwisp, so I was kind of waiting to see what I drew to see if anything could save me, and I drew an uncastable spell. So we did unfortunately lose that one, but it looked good. If we had been able to stem the bleeding, we came close to keeping our opponent not being able to do anything for the rest of the game. But we lose game 1 to Boros Splash Blue energy, let's go on to the sideboarding. So sideboarding for the Jeskai energy matchup, I decided to cut 4 Leonin Arbiter and an Aether Vial, mostly because there are 5 cards to bring in. So Wrath Disguise, again, we have it for this matchup, and in that game it looked like it would have been insanely good. And then 2 Sanctifier to deal with Flage, but also, you know, their removal spells, that kind of thing. We cut Arbiter, mostly because this is an important thing to know when running Leonin Arbiter. If your opponent has a low curve, blowing up their lands isn't going to stop them from doing stuff, so Arbiter is just far too slow, so we're definitely cutting it. And we're cutting a Vial. It is nice to vomit out a lot of stuff at once, but in this deck, we're actually trying to vomit stuff out to abuse Leonin Arbiter, so without Leonin Arbiter, we don't need as much. Also, if we're going to be playing Wrath Disguise, we're going to be blowing up 1-drops most commonly, so we're going to lose our Vials to our Wrath Disguise. It's worth keeping in Giver. We could trim it if we need to bring other stuff in, but without Wrath Disguise, Giver is going to make board states look a little better for us, so we will trim Vial as our 5th trim, and we will run it like this and go on to game number 2. Okay, we get to be on the play for game number 2 against Boros Energy. This is a good hand. Giver runes into Phelia, double Phantom. We got flags, we got a Solitude. That looks pretty good. Our opponent just leads on a Guide of Souls turn 1. So here the plan is flush in Phelia and then start using Phantom. Again, like, I've cut Arbiter, but I think Phantom by itself is going to be really good at blowing up lands, so happy to just play Phantom and flicker it and blow up lands. Our opponent has the nuttiest start of Guide of Souls into Guide of Souls Ocelot Pride. So they get to grow their Guide of Souls and beat in for a bit, so I am just going to throw the Solitude out here to get rid of Ocelot Pride to make sure they don't start making tokens. Even though they've got a 3/4 flyer, I will just have 2 White Orchid Phantoms that get to deal with it in combat. Now, I could block my own flags to ramp, but what am I ramping for? My hand is just another Phantom, so I am going to start denying my opponent mana. Just use the Phantom and the Phelia blinking the Phantom to take out both of my opponent's dual lands, and they do just get double planes. So that tells me that they shouldn't be on basic mountain or basic island, assumedly, so that makes me feel like this mana denial plan is going to be pretty good. Now, here they have Static Prism, which has to take out Giver, which is annoying. I do get to give the Phantom Pro White to make their attacks bad. And unfortunately, I have a Johnny to follow up. So they get enough energy that they are going to jump their second Guide of Souls. It's just gets jump blocked by the Phantom, but their creature doesn't die, so it's worth it just to get the trigger and be able to grow it, because next stage they're going to get to do the trigger again. But I drew Wrath of the Skies, so this is the hugest blowout imaginable in this matchup almost. You know, not only did I blow up their entire board, one of them was a cat token, so their Johnny could have flipped. They chose not to, because if they did, I get to attack and kill it. But also, I blew up the Static Prison, got my Giver back. Giver that was like my 1 card that would have been vulnerable to Wrath. So my opponent actually just scoops it up there. Quick game number 2 for us. Wrath Disguise, proving why I think it's really valuable to help this matchup. And let's move on to game number 3. Okay, game number 3 on the draw against Energy. We would like to see Solitude Ephemerate stuff, and that is exactly what we see with Wrath Disguise as well. So despite Kaldra looking really average here, I am going to keep. Drawing Giver was perfect, because I kind of wanted to hold up Solitude Ephemerate turn 1 anyway, but that would mean shocking in Witch Blast Meta or playing Plains. Giver means I can just do that instead. Now, the reason I would want to bolt in Witch Blast Meta even while holding up Solitude Ephemerate is because I don't want to telegraph failure too bad. So if you play a bolt land on turn 2, you're telling him you definitely have a failure. Now, unfortunately, my opponent has Flage here, and they are going to kill Giver. I could Solitude the Flage to make sure it doesn't come back, but I decide that I think I can work around it. Instead, I'm going to flash in Failure, protect it with Giver so that their Aven Interrupter can't attack. Buys me a little bit of time. I just need to find an answer for this Flage. Stoneforge is actually a really nice draw here. Now, unfortunately, their Aven Interrupter has First Strike, but I really want to get more triggers off this Stoneforge because I want to get as much card advantage as possible. But I realize I'm getting so much card advantage. My opponent has 3 cards left in hand. I definitely want the Lion Sash. If I had got the Lion Sash first, I could have chosen not to attack there, but because I attacked, I really need a Solitude and get rid of their Amped Raptor, even though I have Ephemerate, I'm losing out on that value. Now, they do have a follow-up Amped Raptor, but Phelia's growing outside of it. But they hit Flage, and they could have killed Phelia. They choose to kill Stoneforge. I would assume it's because I was telegraphing Kaldra, by the way, that I didn't shoot her for it. And they have Static Prison for the Phelia anyway, which makes sense. If you prison the Stoneforge and it comes back and get a trigger where it's Phelia, not so much, but I think Phelia's the scarier threat. If you draw a land, you get to play the Lion Sash and eat the first Flage. They do still have another Flage, but it will take a lot for them to get to escape it next turn, especially with their mana situation being what it is. So all I need is for Lion Sash to live a little bit, and I can make sure their Flages are never going to happen. Now they have range cap for Ocelot Pride. They get to attack with Amped Raptor, so my life channel is pretty low and they've got a pretty good setup. I'm just going to eat their Flage out of their bin, and now Lion Sash is actually going to be an insane blocker for these two. If they draw Galvanic Discharge or Static Prison, different story. But for now, Lion Sash getting to eat things out of the graveyard means that it can kind of stalemate this board. Otherwise, they just attack the things into it and lose them. They do have a Giant Ocelot Pride, which is going to be tough to deal with. But the Lion Sash just gets to keep growing here. Now, I have choices here. I am going to just Wrath the Skies for one. Lion Sash, I think, is pretty important here. Blowing up their Static Prison means my Phelia comes back. Their Ajani gets the flip, but my Lion Sash can attack into it, and they have to lose one of their creatures to Lion Sash. So I'm threatening the Ajani dying. They choose to let the Interrupter go, which I think is crazy because that's their red permanent, but for some reason they're valuing Ranger Captain a lot more. So my opponent has another Ranger Captain to follow up, and they choose to get Guide of Souls, so that's a scary prospect. They get to make a Cat Warrior, gain a life, gain an energy now. But because of my earlier shenanigans with the Stoneforge, I do have all the Skyclaves to jump past all their creatures and just outright kill the Sajani. They just drew Ocelot Pride, their Pride Guide, and I am kind of happy to Wrath for one just to mop them up, not to mention the Ocelot Pride tokens that are coming into play. I even have enough leftover mana to play an Aether Vial now, post-Wrath, and hold up Ephemerate if I ever need it. And I think I'm in a good enough position. My opponent has no cards in hand. I'm just going to start getting with this Lion Sash, because in 2 turns it's lethal. I can attack with it again next turn, then the following turn, reconfigure it onto Phelia and force issue. They have Discharge to try and answer my Lion Sash, and I'm just going to Ephemerate it to waste their card. It was either that or waste all their energy, and my opponent decides that they've seen enough, and we win the match 2-1, and we're currently 3-0 in this league. So let's get on to match number 4. So match number 4, we're on the draw against Demir's Shadow. My opponent has a turn 1 Tamir, which is not looking good for our hand. And my opponent has Straight Wraith and Predator. I need to just flip that Tamir immediately, start taking it up, and a Fatal Push to deal with Giver Runes. So I draw Aether Vial, but I'm kind of priced into just, I think, playing out my spells. I could have just played the Aether Vial, but I thought if the Lion Sash lives, maybe we could get somewhere with it. Now I'm just kind of priced into using Flickerwisp to flick a Tamio to reset its loyalty, which just immediately dies Orcish Bowmasters. And my opponent's just got a lot of stuff. The ball means they can flip Tamio again the next turn, and all I can do is play at Aether Vial and hold up Aven Interrupter. And my opponent's just cracking clues, cracking baubles over there, cycling Street Wraith, and Tamio flips again. So they're just getting in here. I could just hold up Aven Interrupter, but this is the problem I've had with Aven Interrupter in the past, is it's good when you're ahead on board. When you're behind on board, like, there's no reason for my opponent to play into it here. So I kind of just have to play it out into removal, into counter magic, into whatever, just to try and eat, you know, this Orcish Bowmaster, and it just dies for Fatal Push. My opponent has another Netherglaive. I kept Stoneforge on top, so I get to play out Stoneforge Mystic here, and with Lion Sash already dead, I could get Maul the Skyclaves or Kaldra, but I'm just not beating these Netherglaives, so I'll scoop it up and we'll go on to game number 2. Let's see how we sideboard. So for sideboarding against Demir's Shadow, I'm choosing to bring in 3 Wrath of the Skies. I didn't see Death Shadows that game, but, you know, all the cards I did see in Tamio, Netherglaive, all that, they all died of Wrath of the Skies. Feels perfect in this kind of matchup. Any matchup where we can kill a lot of 1-drops, I'm happy to bring in Wrath of the Skies. And they're obviously a black spell-heavy deck, so Sanctifier and en-Vec is pretty good to come in. As far as cuts, similar to other games, I'm choosing to cut the flicker effects. This like package of 4 is kind of flexible. If flickers come out, an Ephemerate can normally come out, a Phelia can kind of come out. We're not really doing heaps with, like, the Phantoms by themselves should blow up a few lands already. We're not really needing to do it multiple times. And Phelia is just going to get blocked a lot. It's not going to be able to get into combat too often. And the Aether Vial, even though they do have some counter spells, they're more removal and hand heavy, so we don't want the dead draws at Aether Vial. And again, it's a card that does Wrath of the Skies, so kind of okay to trim one when I bring in Wrath of the Skies. So, okay, on the play for game number 2 against Demir's Shadow, we mulligan a 1-lander that just had a Surveil land. And we keep this, which it has Wrath of the Skies, so that's okay. The main reason, honestly, for keeping it is that against a deck that I assume has Thoughtseize, I don't really want to go to 5. There was a land I put on the bottom. I definitely should have just put them all the Skyclaves on the bottom, because it's not really going to be that relevant. And a hand's full of 3-drops, so we should prioritize getting the 3 mana. And I do immediately get punished by just only drawing 3-drops. I did draw the Lion Sash, which I kind of just had to play, but yeah, this hand's looking pretty average there. Thankfully, we do draw a 3rd land. But this is kind of similar to the situation I got into game 1, where I am just forced to hold up Aven Interrupter, and my opponent doesn't really need to play into it. They do choose to play the Tamiyo, and my thoughts here are I'll play the Aven Interrupter, force them to interact, and then maybe even just Wrath the Skies for the Tamiyo, since they do have 2 in hand. And they played a Death Shadow, so I get to take down 2 of their creatures with this Wrath the Skies, so this is looking a little better for me. I just need them to not cast anything huge here, because I do have the Aven Interrupter if I get to untap again. And choosing to Ghost Quarter myself here, because I get to take out the Flagstones and get my Elegant Parlor and Surveil to try and find some gas here. I find a Leonin Arbiter, and my opponent's already got 4 lands in place. This is definitely not a board state for Arbiter, and I'm kind of also happy to draw more lands, so we do put in the bin and find Eiganjo, which is maybe one of the better lands to draw, because it does deal with Tamiyo and other aggressive creatures. And we draw Sanctifier en-Vec. So here I definitely want to be able to have Aven Interrupter, so we play the Eiganjo, Sanctifier. Aven Interrupter is not the best, because Drannith can kill the Aven, but I figure I want to get the Sanctifier in play. My opponent has Counterspell, which is exactly the kind of card we want to use Aven Interrupter on. So we play Giver, try and put the Maul on it to hopefully be able to do something with this game, and our opponent does have the Fatal Push. They only have 1 card left in hand, and I've got a Wrath of the Skies. They played a Netherglobe, so I'm in a good spot here, as long as they didn't draw into another Counterspell. So we'll just jam Wrath of the Skies, and my opponent, of course, their last card is a Counterspell. So I will just play out the Phantom, try and interrupt their mana a little, and hope to find a way to get past these 2 Netherglyphs, even though I've already gone through 2 Wrath of the Skies already. And these games have kind of been an indicator of why... I mean, Aven Interrupter feels necessary in the meta because of Nadu. It feels like it's pretty good in that matchup, but I'm only on 2 because, you know, I drew both in this game and they looked bad, and they looked pretty average in game 1, where they're only good if you're ahead, so... unfortunately, I thought putting Maul on my Phantom for some reason would make it fight favorably with Netherglyph, but that's fine because I drew Solitude, but my opponent drew another Counterspell, so that will wrap up that game. So currently 3-1. Okay, match number 5, we're on the draw against Dimir Control. My opponent leads Watery Grave into Preordain. That's fine, I was a little traumatized after the last game, was expecting to see Tamiyo here and just immediately have a bad time. I kept a decent hand that had White Orchid Phantom, Phelia, Ephemerate, and Stoneforge. Drawing Aether Vial was really nice, because now we're in the position I've talked about where we're kind of trying to tempt our opponent into removal or interaction with the cards we're happy for them to interact with, and then resolving the actually important cards in our hand. So they have the spell stand for the first Stoneforge. Drawing the second Stoneforge made me play that out, otherwise I was probably just going to play out the Phantom to try and ramp myself off my Flagstones. And now here we're in a spot where we want to flash in Phelia, violin either Phantom or Stoneforge with Ephemerate as an option. Okay, my opponent, in their draw step, I choose to White Orchid Phantom. This will deny them this mana because it will now get a tap land. I could Ephemerate the Phantom here, but because they are blue-black, I figured they can just float the mana and use it, so I would make them act first, and they chose not to. So here they're playing out the Frog, so I'm going to Ephemerate the Phantom. This would have been punished by a Fatal Push, but I was willing to run that risk. The thought process here was force them to interact now by targeting their untapped land, and that would let Phelia resolve. But they ended up just having Cling to Dust. So Phelia resolves anyway. Ephemerate takes down the land. They only have these 2 basics, apparently. So looking pretty good for us. Attack with Phelia, trying to bait the Frog, see what they do with it. They choose to just let the Frog die. I don't know what that was about, but my Phantom gets to ramp me by hitting my Flagstones. I choose not to get my Surveil land, and I Ghost Quarter one of their 2 basics. So they play a Surveil land here, which I'm just going to blow up with the Phantom again. You get to Violent Stoneforge, you get Kaldra. Kaldra's in play, Phantom's going to blow up one of their 2 mana sources, and they scoop it up. So sideboarding against Dimir Control, similar to sideboarding against the Dimir Shadow deck we played against before, but because they are Control, not Shadow, I am kind of happy to leave in all my vials for all their counterspells. And also don't need to bring in Wrath of the Skies, so we are just going to bring in the 2 Sanctifier en-Vec for the Phelia and the Ephemerate. Ephemerate is good into their removal, but if we're more ETB focused, I'd care more about it. But what I'm more focused on is that Solitude scheme isn't as relevant here. Really like trimming the 4th Phelia against Psychic Frog specifically, because Phelia just does not get into combat against the Frog very well. So that's how we've sideboarded. Let's get on to game number 2. Okay, on the draw for game number 2. We keep a 7 that has turn 1 Aether Vial. No great 2-drop. It has Lion Sash, which is fine, but we draw into Arbiter, so that's good. And our opponent plays Psychic Frog, which is, I think, one of the harder cards for our deck to deal with, especially in this matchup. That card just gets good card advantage. Drawing cards, getting evasion, growing. Very, very strong card. I'm just going to lead on Lion Sash here. And I do choose to chump block the Psychic Frog just to prevent my opponent drawing a card. I think once my Vial ticks up to 2 and I have this Giver of Runes in play, I should be in a pretty good spot. Our opponent has Consuming Corruption, which I haven't seen this one in Modern before, but it is an MH3 card, which I didn't even know existed, so that's cool. We're just going to hold up Aven Interrupter here and hold in Vialing in Leonin Arbiter, which I apparently F6'd and could not respond to this fetch land with the Vial. Our opponent has another fetch land. They're going to play Psychic Frog. I'm going to Interrupter this. And it looks like our opponent had an answer. They had to crack the fetch land for some reason, even though they had Urborg. So this gives me an opportunity to blow them out by Vialing an Arbiter. So immediately getting unpunished for F6ing with my opponent having a fetch land and playing me with Arbiter in hand. We'll take the Vial up to 3 so we can Vial in this Flickerwisp. And we'll play out the Giver and the Phantom. So now we're once again in a position we want to be with this build of the deck, where we get to blow up our opponent's land. And now we're going to Vial in the Flickerwisp, Flicker the Phantom, and take out another land, leaving our opponent with just Urborg in play. And the reason I did that post-combat was so that my opponent couldn't get advantage off the mana they were floating off their land, because I specifically targeted their untapped land, because the basic they get to replace it would come in tapped if they did have a way to dodge the Arbiter. Now, my opponent acted with Frog, chose to trade away a bunch of my board there, but that was mostly because my opponent drawing cards with Frog was something I wanted to avoid. And I wanted to make sure they couldn't just discard their hand to trade with a couple of things. So by blocking with all 3, they had to discard their whole hand, and they choose to do that for some reason. So my opponent has no cards in hand and no mana. So they're really relying on the Psychic Frog, and I'm just going to continue denying them mana. At this point, they can kind of draw cards because our mana denial is so good. So the Psychic Frog can have fun, I guess. Now, I am keeping a creature back every time here at the moment, mostly to make my opponent have to keep giving the Psychic Frog flying, so eventually I can just block it with a ground creature and protect it with Giver Runes to stop them from drawing cards ever again. And there we did choose to flicker the Aether Vial, because it was up to 3, and with a Flickerwisp and an Aven Interrupter in the graveyard, I figured I wouldn't need to violate any more 3-drops. But my opponent tried to Fatal Push, checking to make sure I was aware that I had a Giver Runes in play, and once I activated it, they chose to scoop. So that was a 2-0 against Dimir Control, giving us a 4-1 in the league. Let's go to the post-league wrap-up. Okay, so a 4-1 record with the deck. Pretty happy with it overall. I think a lot of our card choices were kind of explained, you know, going to the sideboard really quick. We didn't see Drannith or High Noon do anything, because they're mostly there for the combo decks. We want to be able to answer them. And we played mostly fair matchups this league. Hallowed Moonlight, similarly, like we can and do bring it in fair matchups sometimes, but it's mostly there to stop degenerate stuff. We didn't verse Jeskai Control, which is the main card Flares for, but these were our MVPs in our sideboard. You know, Sanctifier and en-Vec just being a good creature in those grindy matchups, especially like the blue-black kind of matchups, like that Dimir Control deck. And Wrath of the Skies was probably our MVP. Mopped up that energy deck. It should have been good in the Shadow matchup if we were in positions where we could get it in around Counter Magic and Disruptor Flute. This is, yeah, again, mostly for the One Ring, because that card is really scary to try and beat. And especially with an Arbiter build, we can't do much more than just trying to Disruptor Flute it. Looking at the main deck, I think everything's pretty locked in as far as this main deck. You know, these, I think you want minimum 3 Stoneforge targets. You could go down to 2, which would probably just be these 2. But I think Maul has a lot of value to it, even just being a tutorable card to pitch to Solitude. But because we are running Phelia and we are going to blink the Stoneforge, sometimes having 3 equipment to get is pretty valuable. And I think one of the unspoken things about that is we can get the Kaldra for if the Stoneforge survives, but also have a backup plan for if the Stoneforge dies and not get punished for getting Kaldra off the Stoneforge. Solitude's obviously good. Ephemerates, we could go up to 4. I think in an Arbiter build, especially 3 makes sense. Giver and Vial, obviously pretty mainstay, especially Giver into Stoneforge, pretty important. Vial, pretty important, we're so heavy on 2-drops. And Arbiter, Phelia, and Phantom are very, very good, and they worked really nicely together. We saw plenty in that league, opportunities for Arbiter to really shine. and we saw these 3 cards kind of working harmoniously together. And what I was talking about trying to duke into positions where we can get this kind of setup going by baiting with Stoneforge, or even baiting with the Phantom, and then be able to ephemerate it later to get the actual value once the Arbiter's in play. We didn't really see too much out of all this. I mean, Witch Enchanter being played as a 4-mana 2/2, you know, like the old Simian Spirit Guide being played as a 3-mana 2/2, that actually did come up sometimes. We didn't get to really cheat it with Flickerwisp much, but just the fact that when we're flooding, we can just play this as a body, you know, to fight Ragman and stuff is pretty interesting. Razorgrass Ambush, I need to do more testing to work this out, but I'm not willing to run 2 copies to get actual testing with it, but seems fine. I don't know. I think next time I will definitely play 60 cards and cut the 61st card, whether it's a Razorgrass or an Eiganjo. Mana base seemed fine. We didn't get punished by Flagstones at all there, which we will at some point, but we did in that league. And I think with our curve being so low, I think that's a reason that this is kind of fine, because the upside with Phantom is so high that the downside isn't too bad when we're playing, you know, a handful of 2-drops. And then the 3-drops, I think, again, Aven Interrupter is mostly for Nadu to deal with Court of Calling. It's also fine against Wrath of the Skies, Supreme Verdict, all that. I could see not running Aven Interrupter or going down to just 1 or something, just a Miser's Aven Interrupter. But I don't know what I'd replace it with. Flickerwisp is good, but I don't think I'd want more than the 2 copies. I could see maybe having a 3rd, but then I don't know what the last card would be. Maybe, yeah, 3 Flickerwisp, 1 Aven Interrupter. I think ideally once Nadu's banned, these Aven Interrupters move to the sideboard over maybe High Noon or something. But for the current meta, especially considering how annoying Nadu is, I think I like where this 60's at. Again, once we take out the 61st card. But yeah, thank you all for watching. I think a 4-1's a pretty good result in current Modern with Death and Taxes, so pretty happy with that one. So let me know what you thought down in the comments, and until next time, bye-zy.